Hi there, friends. I'm Eli. I'm one of the hosts of this TechSoup Connect Canada chapter, along with Ben Abel, my co-host, who's been sending you email messages and giving you a good sense of what we're going to be all about today. Today, we're going to talk about the kind of fundraising I think that is most intimidating for organizations because it's not just a quick one-off thing. It's a campaign. It's a multi-step project. I'm delighted that we have a guest expert with us, Frances Roen, who is the fundraising strategist and CEO of Fundraising Soul. Frances has been specializing in capital campaign planning and nonprofit fundraising strategy with nearly 20 years of experience and over 200 million raised. Can you beat that? That's a big number. She's guided organizations through every stage of capital campaigns, from pre-planning and feasibility studies to execution and donor engagement. And when Frances is not fundraising, she's either running very slowly, because why drive yourself crazy, around the Twin Cities lake, or Frances is on the hunt for the perfectly fried piece of chicken, or maybe even just planning the next family holiday. So with that, you're in great hands.
I'm Frances. I want to thank TechSoup for hosting this and for having me here. And I'm really excited to see all the places and spaces that you all are joining from. It's just such a nice group and it's really diverse. So today we are going to talk about laying the groundwork, what you need to know before launching a capital campaign, and what you need to do before you launch a capital campaign. So hopefully you're in the right spot. This is why you came here today. I know what Eli said, capital campaigns can be a little bit intimidating. And I think that is simply because capital campaigns don't happen all the time. They are something unique. Organizations are typically doing them maybe every 5 years, but more likely every 10 years, every 20 years. It's reasonable to not have a great deal of experience in capital campaigns. And that's why we're here today, to learn a little bit more. Before we get into the content, I do want to find out from all of you, and maybe Eli, you can help me a little bit with this. Put it in the chat for me, just an A, B, or C. So A would be we are thinking about a campaign. B would be we are actively planning a campaign. And C would be we are in a campaign right now. Just curious where everyone's at. So A, thinking about, B, actively planning, and C, actively campaigning. What do we have, Eli?
We've got lots of A's and B's coming at us. We don't have any C's quite yet.
Okay, great.
Oh, we do have someone in the quiet phase of C. Nice.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. If you're in the quiet phase, hopefully you're going to take away a few things to learn here too. Maybe there's something that you need to circle back on and get completed before you enter the public phase. So I'm glad you're here and I'm confident you'll take something away too. But A's and B's, this is a part for you to be at, and I'm really excited to talk to you. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about me. Eli mentioned I'm on the search for a perfectly fried piece of chicken, and that is true. So I'm happy to take recommendations. I grew up in the South. I saw there was someone from Atlanta, actually originally from Georgia. So it's hard to beat my grandmother's fried chicken, but I'm always on the hunt. So recommendations welcome. Anytime in the chat, pop that in there. But I also want to tell you a little bit about my experience. So previously, I was actually in your seat. If you're a director of development working for a nonprofit, that's what I did for almost 18 years. And when I was the director of development, I actually helped to lead two capital campaigns. One, I came in at the end of a campaign where they were really stalled and struggling. And we ended up having to use some general operating dollars to complete our campaign, which is never what you want to do. The second time, we actually hired a consultant to help us, but I'm not sure our consultant was using us in all the best ways. So we went in to our campaign. We announced our goal very early. We didn't have a very warm donor pipeline. We didn't have all the things in our case for support that we needed. And so we felt like we were scrambling. Is this enough money? Is this really going to fulfill the mission and the vision that we have? And it was exhausting and honestly nearly broke me. It was such, I was emotionally spent. I think we all were by the end of the campaign. And when I left and I started consulting, I started being asked to come on and help folks with their capital campaigns. And to be honest, I totally hesitated. I was not sure I wanted to do that. But then when I paused, I realized I could actually maybe help people not suffer through what I did in the process and help people come into campaigns with a very clear plan and a good foundation and the infrastructure they need to be successful, not to burn out, to reach their goals and feel good while they're doing it. So I am excited to be able to share a little bit of that with you today. So, what is a capital campaign? We use this term really broadly and like an umbrella at Soul. And I forgot to mention, my company is Fundraising Soul. So, we work with small and mid-sized nonprofits on capital campaigns and some interim fundraising as well. But we use this term very broadly to mean any type of large scale, multi year fundraising effort above and beyond your annual giving program. We are going to touch on some things here that have to do with gap campaigns. They follow a lot of the same needs regarding what you need to plan and how you might go about testing a gap campaign and making it work for you. So we will touch on that a bit, but I'm always happy to answer additional questions if that's something you all are considering. But a capital campaign, it could be for a building, it could be capacity building, expansion of programming, endowment, comprehensive, meaning all of these things wrapped into one. But they're all going to follow the same process and formula when it comes to planning. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, regardless of what you've got up your sleeve and what you're thinking about, I'm hopeful that you can find something to take away and get to planning and feel good about it. So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to start by talking about where does planning fit in, some of the cost of skipping planning, because most organizations do have a tendency to rush this part. Some shifting conditions that we're seeing across the board. I am going to talk about broadly in North America, so including Canada, what campaign planning looks like. We're going to touch also a little bit on building a donor pipeline before and during your campaign process, why a feasibility or starting point, and what goes into a campaign plan. And then I'll also leave some time at the end for question and answers. But I know Eli, I think, is managing our chat. So if you have a question and you think, gosh, I'm never going to remember that, or I've got to sign off a little early, please pop it in the chat. And Eli promised he'll bring it up when the time is right, and I'll do my best to answer it. So I love this quote. I love starting with this when we think about planning. Spectacular achievement is always preceded by unspectacular preparation. I say sometimes the planning of a campaign is not very sexy work, but it is very important because before you ask for a single dollar, there's some serious prep work that you need to do to really set your stage for success. So preparation is not just a buzzword. It's really what gives our campaign the fuel and the lift that it needs to succeed. As a reminder, just to reiterate a couple of things I've already said, a campaign really starts long before your ask. So don't rush the planning part. Campaigns are marathons and they're not sprints. There is a lot of work to do that is going to set you up for success. It's not unusual for clients who might be working on a campaign that involves land purchases or affordable housing or multiple phases for that planning to be in the works for years before the public hears about it. So you're going to go through a planning phase, a feasibility phase, and then into a quiet and a public phase. All right, feasibility studies. It is so common for us to get contacted by organizations say, hey, we are ready to do a feasibility study. We want to do that first and then launch into a capital campaign. We have an RFP out. We'd love for you to send us a proposal. But as soon as we start asking some questions, we realize there's a lot of the groundwork that hasn't been done to set them up for success in that feasibility study. So their case isn't clear. They haven't really drafted that. They're not clear about their campaign cost or their project cost. Their donor pipeline might feel a little bit wobbly, but all of these things to say they aren't ready yet to even move into a feasibility study. Just a reminder that a feasibility study doesn't test your readiness or doesn't build readiness, it tests it. So you're not building readiness just by doing a feasibility study. That comes before that to make sure that you are ready to move forward with a campaign. So people often ask, where does planning fit in? How long do we need to spend there? It's really been two key phases. It happens in the beginning over here. We call it campaign pre-planning. It can last up to a year. Certainly, sometimes I've seen it last longer if folks need to be purchasing some land or there's some political goodwill they need to build, et cetera. The campaign pre-planning can take a little longer. Then you move into a feasibility study. That is short and sweet. You want to get your information in real time and then come back and do some campaign planning. So there's no sense in asking for input if it's not going to shape your campaign in any way. So you get input from your feasibility study. You move back into campaign planning. You tweak things. You may need to tweak your goal or some of the language in your case or maybe your timeline. And then you move into your active campaigning, which follows the quiet phase. I heard someone mention that. Sometimes it's called a leadership phase. Then you'll have a campaign kickoff and launch into your public phase. And of course, you have donor stewardship on the end of that. Most campaigns that we work on are about 3 years in length. We certainly work on shorter ones, and we have worked on longer ones as well. All right. So, some of the costs of skipping the planning work. People oftentimes say pre planning costs money if we want to hire a consultant to help us, and actually is going to cost you more money on the end if you don't do this work. One of the things that you do during pre planning is assessing your readiness, making sure your infrastructure is in place. So when you don't do this and you get into your campaign and you realize, oh my goodness, we should have had someone else in our development department to keeping that annual fund going. And our development director is spending all their time on the campaign. Suddenly you realize you're having all this donor attrition, which is not good because you're going to need to ask those donors at some point for gifts and you're going to need to hire someone else. And so there's this sort of big gap and hole in your campaign because you didn't address that in the beginning. So when you don't do the pre planning, you do a lot of scrambling to fill gaps. I saw this in a number of campaigns that I worked on before. When I was a director of development, what would happen is we might not have our gift policies in place and our campaign policies and procedures. And then you'd get to some point in the campaign and a donor would say, hey, I really would love to give to this campaign, but I want you to put our name on the building. And then there would have to be a pause and a lot of conversation around that because we hadn't taken time to have a conversation on whether we would accept a gift if the person said, and you have to name your building after me. So these are all things that you can address in the pre-planning process so that when you move into active campaigning, you are not having to build your plan while you're flying it. It will save you so much headache and it will actually end up saving you quite a bit of cost. So here's some of the classic campaign pitfalls we see. And I always say if we can spot them, then we can avoid them. One of the biggest ones is launching too soon. And this is probably the biggest one, I'll be honest. And then the last one on the list, too. I know it's really tempting to get the word out and start raising dollars right away. But when you do that, you risk that one, you haven't tested that goal amount, that you haven't thought through what that goal is, and it's not actually going to cover all your costs, that you have to go back to donors and say, whoops, we made a mistake. We ask you for $1 million, but we're really hoping that you'll give us $1.5 million. The messaging is confusing. The goal is out there and it's hard to reach because you didn't test it. So I always encourage people let's pause for a moment and walk through the pre-planning and then launch our campaign when the time is right. The second one is fuzzy goals. If your team can't clearly explain what your campaign is funding, then your donors are not going to be inspired to give to it. They're not going to understand either. So, one of the things that you do during pre planning is get some alignment around what are those campaign objectives and how much they're going to cost. And so that way you're very clear on what those objectives are, what the costs are. And then, of course, why does it matter? When we do these things, when this is funded, when we are able to make these changes or build this building, or have these extra programs, this is going to happen for and with our community. This is the benefit. The third one is weak engagement. Critical during your campaign planning is obviously to keep up with your annual fund. So keep engaging the current donors and funders that you have. We always say keep cultivating, keep engaging, keep soliciting, keep stewarding. We also, in our work with our clients, we use a process of micro committees that we actually bring in committees during the pre planning process, which is something I always encourage folks to do. I know we're very used to hearing about a steering committee that stays with your campaign for the life of it. There's nothing wrong with that. And I will say most campaigns still have one of those, but it doesn't need to be the only committee that you have. And that's a long ask for folks to say, hey, do you want to be on this committee? We're going to meet once a month for 5 years. Nobody wants to sign up for that. So we actually use some micro committees during the pre planning process. We might have a core committee and then a pre-planning committee who helps for a couple of months with things. You can even have a feasibility study committee. So these are short-term committee engagements for folks. So then that could be, would you like to join us for this committee? It's for 3 months. We're going to meet once a month. People are much more likely to say yes. And it's a great way to engage some donors and volunteers and more board members early in the process. Then here's the other one is thinking you can add it to current job description. I don't know if there's any board members on this call or not, but it is, I think, a rampant belief in the nonprofits that we're just going to do this without hiring any assistant. Your executive director and your development director, if you have one, are going to be pulled into this campaign almost entirely. You can bet that your executive director will end up spending between 50 to 75% at least of their time on a campaign, especially a large one. And your director of development will likely be spending about half of their time as well. So this is an additional job. You are going to have to hire help. You are absolutely not going to be able to do it on your own. And so help can look a lot of different ways. It certainly can be a consultant. It can be hiring in folks part time. It can be beefing up your board if you have a board that's more of a doer board and busy worker bees. That might be able to work. There's certainly ways to do it without having a consultant. I would say most organizations do bring in some type of guidance and expertise, but you can certainly hire part-time, hire full-time, hire at a later time during the campaign. So one of the things we think about during pre-planning is where are our gaps? Where and at what point might we need to bring on some additional help? So here's what you gain from thoughtful planning. Obviously, you gain clear and shared campaign objectives. You gain some early champions. You can bring folks into the pre-planning process, a unified leadership and confident staff. So you do need to be keeping your board and staff updated throughout the planning process. Realistic staffing. So being realistic about what you're going to need and where you have gaps, and systems. So do you need to get a new CRM system, a new database? Do you need to invest in some marketing technologies so you can send out email blasts? And obviously a warm and engaged donor pipeline, because ideally you're going to have someone who's going to be working on your team to continue driving that annual support throughout this process.
Awesome. This is a great chance for me to pop in with one of our first questions. So it
Please.
comes from Susan Stevenson, who asks, what are some typical problems that might arise in working with a consultant on a feasibility study? For example, what if the major donors would rather meet with staff rather than be interviewed by an outside consultant?
Susan, thanks. Thanks for being here. Thanks for that question. I'm glad you brought that up. So we actually use what we call as a guided feasibility process. I'm reading between the lines a little bit with what you ask. What we believe is that donors actually do want to talk to you more than they want to talk to a consultant. A feasibility study is an incredible opportunity to meet with 20 to 30 of your closest supporters or prospective donors or community leaders to get their feedback and build relationships. So we actually train you when we work with folks to go out and have those conversations with your community supporters and prospective donors, because we believe that they're going to tell you the same things that they would tell us. And it also gives you an opportunity to follow up with them. Oftentimes, when a consultant does a guided feasibility study, you're getting back kind of aggregate and anonymous data. So if someone says they're confused about something or have a question about something, you don't really have a way to follow back up with them. So we'd prefer to have you out there having those conversations.
Awesome. And here comes the second one coming in from our friend Becky, who says, what do you advise if an organization needs to conduct a capital campaign, but they don't yet have a fundraising board?
Yes. Okay. So this has come up a couple of times. This is not unusual. First of all, you're never going to have the perfect board. Or maybe you do, and you're a unicorn in the nonprofit world. The a not perfect board, don't let that keep you from moving forward with a campaign. But what you do want to do is if you have some boards who are just not excited about moving forward with a campaign, they're not aligned, they're really going to be your naysayers. This is a great opportunity for executive directors to do what I always call growing up in the South, like a bless and release. Thank you so much, bringing in some new and fresh board. The other thing that happens during pre planning is training for your board members. So, not only are you going to keep them up to date on what you're doing, you're going to teach them about their roles and responsibilities in fundraising and for a campaign. You're going to teach your leadership about those as well, so that maybe they weren't a fundraising board to start, but they are a fundraising board at the end. And by fundraising, I don't mean they're all going out and asking for gifts, but they understand what different roles they can play for fundraising. So, opening doors, hosting events, being a participant in a site visit, being an advocate for you, making connections. So all of those things are important for fundraising, showing gratitude to donors, et cetera. So we want folks to have a place in the campaign that's comfortable for them. We also do want our board members to make a campaign gift, whatever's personally significant for them. So it could be $100, it could be $100,000, but you want them to find their own personal space in the campaign.
Great. And then I got one more before we move to the next phase. So it's about how do we fund some of this free work as we get prepared for a capital campaign. So Becky asks, can we go to foundations to ask for capital campaign consultant funding? Is that something, or is that unusual?
So many organizations, they will fund pre-planning a few different ways. Some certainly have some savings, cash reserves, reallocate and use for campaign consultants to come in and help with the pre-planning, early actual drawings that they might need if they're doing building. Other organizations will go to funders. I know we have a number here in the Twin Cities and in Minnesota who do give out what they call like management improvement funds and other things that we have actually been the recipients of as consultants. We haven't been the recipients. We have been paid for through that. We've had clients who've been the recipients of the funds and chosen to use them to pay for some consulting support and pre-planning. The other option, which isn't talked about often, but is there are some donors or board members who really want to see this campaign get off the ground. And they may be willing to make a gift to cover the cost of pre-planning and early work. We are working with an organization right now who raised about $150,000 in very early gifts from board members and one donor in particular who was very close to the planning process to pay for some of the pre-planning work. And it doesn't need to cost 150,000, but they had a lot of, it was a very large campaign and they have many things going on. So those are a couple of different ways to do it. There's also looking into financing. There's all of ways to pay for the pre-planning if you need some dollars.
Aw- Awesome. Very helpful.
Okay. All right. So is now the right time to start a campaign? So for my US folks on the call, we are getting asked this all the time here with there's so many shifts in the economic climate, the political climate. There's just a lot going on down here south of your border. But the same in Canada. Things are shifting all the time for folks. And they always, when you think about it, it does feel like a happy time right now. So I wanted to share some information, some statistics about campaigns right now of the State of the Union around that. But what we typically tell our clients is there isn't a bad time to start a campaign. It's just that you have to be planful about it. You have to be thoughtful and intentional. So, with good planning, any campaign can succeed. So, this is some statistics from a study done by Capital Campaign Pro, which is a great resource if you're not familiar with them. It's a study of, I think, 500 nonprofits across Canada and the US. And here's some of the things that kind of fell out of that. And I just took some highlights. There's a whole report on their website if you wanted to go there. Great news. 96% of nonprofits that launched capital campaigns in 2024 consider them successful. And actually, over 100%, it was like 106% or something, exceeded their goal. So that's incredible news. The other good news is that over half of nonprofits reported that external factors did not negatively impact their campaigns. So campaigns are successful right now. Again, I don't think there's any bad time to start a campaign. Your timeline may shift. It may end up being a little longer. You may have to adjust goals, but campaigns are successful in many different markets. So here are the keys, though, still from this study and what we just know about campaigns. Board engagement is crucial. So you're going to need to have a board who's on board with this process and engaged in it. Strategic planning. Please have your strategic planning driving your campaign. So if you haven't done a strategic plan, that is something you absolutely want to do before you move into a campaign. You want that guiding you. Where do you want to be in 5 years? This campaign is going to help us get there. Thoughtful planning. You want to make sure your annual funds are continuing to thrive. So someone who is continuing to build that pipeline, very important. And the 80-20 rule is true. If you're not familiar with that, which most of you probably are, it's 80% of your funds will come from 20% of your donors. I always say the wealthy out there still certainly have dollars, and that hasn't changed. We are still seeing that in campaign funding right now. We get asked a lot. I just touched on this a little bit, so I'll go through this fairly quickly. Strengthening your donor pipeline. We always say identify your top donors. One of the things we do in pre-planning is identifying what we call your top 20, maybe it's higher than that, 50 donors. You're going to build out in pre-planning a gift chart and a depth chart once you have your working campaign goal. And you're going to say, we need this many gifts at this many levels, and here's our potential prospects for those gifts. So once you've identified your top donors, in addition to just keeping your annual fund going, you're going to know really where to focus your efforts and continuing to engage and cultivate this particular group of donors. So continue soliciting for your annual fund, assign relationship leads to those folks who you anticipate needing to ask early gifts for the campaign, and bring them in early to the campaign. Maybe some of them want to be part of a pre-planning committee, or you want to interview them. You do want to interview them during the feasibility study. So these are all the ways to strengthen your donor pipeline. All right, let's talk about what campaign planning looks like. So it seems a lot of times people think, let's just jump to that glossy brochure. We'll do the feasibility. We'll put together this brochure, a PowerPoint, a website. I just want to reiterate, and maybe I haven't said this yet, that those things actually happen during the phase of the campaign. Please don't put out your goals publicly and print brochures during your feasibility study, because ideally you're getting input from your community and it's going to change and shape it a bit. Planning, everything is in a draft and it's a Word document. That's what we're going for, and a Google Drive somewhere. You're going to get alignment on your campaign vision and the objectives and the cost. You're going to build some internal capacity. So you're going to do an honest assessment of what your infrastructure looks like. And then you're going to build capacity by doing some training. You're going to draft, is the keyword, a compelling case for support in a Word document. You're going to identify and qualify some of your key donor prospects. So we'll talk about this in a bit more detail in a second. And you're going to outline a working campaign goal and a timeline. And so we say working, you could say drafting goal. This is what you are hoping to raise based on what you know. That's what you're going to take on and test. And then a timeline, which is going to guide you through the process, which will probably have to be tweaked a little bit after a feasibility study. All of it may have to be tweaked just a little bit after a feasibility study. All right, before you even dive into building the campaign plan, you got to pause and do an honest assessment of your capacity. And this is what we mean by assessing capacity. You want to do an honest assessment of your staff, board readiness, the technology that you have, your strategic plan, the systems and the processes you're using. So you're really digging into your internal infrastructure and saying, where are we doing great? Where are we likely to have some gaps? What do we need to strengthen before we get into a campaign and everything is moving really fast and we don't have time to do it? You also want to address mindset. This is something that makes fundraising so a little bit different. We focus a lot on this, especially during the pre planning process. What assumptions and fears and misconceptions do folks have? We believe that your mindset is the energy you bring into the campaign, and that can really make or break a campaign. It also reduces burnout as well because you're talking about things up front. You're helping people understand what this is going to feel like throughout the next 3 or 5 years. We're also bringing ideas to leadership. How are you going to support your staff? Because what we found is a lot of things change during a campaign. So you may be moving locations, you're asked to do more, sometimes with what feels like with less. There's just a lot going on. And so taking care of your staff and yourself is really important. What skills and tools and resources will you need to be successful? So you're thinking about, what do we need? Do we need to beef up our board over here? Do we need to bring in a consultant who might have expertise in this particular area? Do we need to beef up our finance team? Maybe we need a fractional CFO. We haven't had one of those, and we're going to need to run some financial scenarios. And we just have a bookkeeper right now. So you're going to want to think about those things. And then we're going to look at the donor pipeline. So if you don't have a donor pipeline, if you can't name a good number of people who would make significant gifts to your campaign, maybe $10 million isn't in the realm of possibility. So you want to have some honest conversations early in the process. These are the things that go into what we call as a campaign plan. And so ideally, after your campaign pre-planning and then your feasibility result, you will come with to your board a campaign plan and say, these are all the pieces of the campaign we would like to move forward. We believe that we can move forward based on these things, based on the work that we've done, this foundational work, based on the results of our feasibility study. We are now ready to launch into the leadership or the quiet phase. Campaign objectives and cost. So those are, we're going to build a building and or 40 more units of housing, and it's going to cost $10 million. We're going to expand scholarships for young people, and it's going to cost $1 million. And we're going to cash reserves, and that's $500,000. So what are the components and what are those costs associated with those? Then your campaign budget, which is different from your cost. So I'd like to call this out separately. Your campaign budget is, how much is it going to cost you to raise this money? Because it will cost you to raise money. Even if you're doing it in the most simple terms, you're going to have to print things. You're going to have events. You're going to take folks out to lunch or dinner or coffee. You're probably going to have to maybe pay someone to do some PR for you, or invest in a new system, or upgrade some technologies, or hire a consultant. All of these things are how much it's going to cost to raise that money. A good rule of thumb is 10%. So if your campaign is $1 million, we like to say it could cost you up to $100,000 to raise that. So then your whole campaign working goal is $1.1 million. Most organizations take less than that. I would say that we see folks fall somewhere between 5 and 7% usually, but 10% gives you a little wiggle room. Case for support draft. This is Think Word Doc. This is an internal document to get all the details down with your working campaign goal, which is, again, those costs and your campaign cost. So project cost and campaign cost for your working campaign goal. We like to put together what we call a strategic engagement list. These are your champions. So these are, I like to say, the 20 to 30 people who you have to have around the table to make this campaign a success. And sometimes those are folks who you already know, and other times those are folks who you want to know. So it could be a funder that you feel like, for this to be successful, we really need such and such a foundation to make an investment in this. Be the mayor or a city council member, or here's who we think we need around the table, and we want to make them our champions. So this is our strategic engagement list that we're going to work on through the life of the campaign. We like to pull that together in the beginning, a gift chart and a depth chart. So once you have your working campaign goal, you're going to want to pull together a gift chart that says we need this many gifts to get there. And the depth chart is, here are the people we think might get those gifts. Walking through your committee structures. So thinking about how you want to use committees, you want to do that early on. And then, of course, your campaign policies and recognition plans and a working timeline. So just a note about those campaign policies. A lot of folks will say, do we need our pledge form ready? No, you don't, unless you're soliciting some early gifts for pre-planning. We're not soliciting gifts like typical campaign gifts during the pre-planning or the feasibility, but it's just a good rule of thumb to have these campaign policies being worked on and have a plan. Because ideally, once you do your feasibility study, you want to come back and quickly tweak things. And then if the feasibility study gave you a green light, you want to move into your active campaigning. You don't want to have this long gap because it can't be you did a feasibility study and then a year later you start your campaign. What you found out during your feasibility study may not be relevant anymore. Things may have shifted. Foundations may have changed what they're supporting, etc. Getting this done early just saves you time and having to stall and hold on things and allows you to move forward very quickly. Do we have any questions, Eli?
Yeah, we do have two questions in the queue we can hit up right now.
Okay.
Let's see. So the first question I've got here is, so you talked a little bit about building reserve, and could that be a capital plan campaign goal, or does it always need to be for like building a building or something like
Absolutely. It's really common to have endowments or building reserves as part of your campaign plan. I think funders and donors want to make sure that the work you
that?
do is sustainable. And so having reserves and building those is a great way to talk about it. Oftentimes people say, what's the best way to build reserves or what's the best way to build an endowment if we're including it in our plan? So a couple of different things. One way you can build, one thing we encourage folks to do is when they're out asking for gifts for the campaign, you're asking for folks to continue their annual gift, to make a special gift to the campaign. So one time pledge that might be over 3 or 5 years, and then to consider a planned gift. The planned gifts are a great way to grow your endowments. And we prefer to actually not calculate dollar amounts for those planned gifts. That's something that's really gets really complicated to figure out how much planned gifts are worth, and they're non-binding anyways when you get those types of letters of intent that someone intends to leave you in their will or whatever they're using as their plan gift mechanism. But we like to have an activity goal for plan giving. And so that could be that we want to get 20 new plan donors for a campaign. And so then you can honor folks that become a part of the campaign through plan giving. But raising reserves is absolutely a logical thing to have in your campaign. You just put it in there, you put a dollar amount on it, you explain why it's important and why it's supporting your mission, and it becomes part of the larger working campaign goal.
Awesome. And one more question. We're all working with different communities, with different local capacity. Did you see a difference between capital campaign size and level of success with rural number nonprofits versus those who may be in bigger metro areas?
I think without a doubt, sometimes they are different in size and scope. In Minnesota, a lot of the organizations that are rural who we're working with, we're really lucky here in our state that we have funders who fund in the Twin Cities, which is Minneapolis and St. Paul. For those of you who aren't familiar, those are our two biggest cities, and they're side by side. But they also fund more broadly in the state, and they're very good about making sure that money is going to rural communities too. So I think it's looking if you're a rural community to say what relationships do we need to build who might be funding in our area but aren't located in our area. And so that would be those champions building a list early to say, hey, there's this funder who we don't know really well because they are located in our largest city, but they fund in rural areas and they haven't funded us yet, but we'd like to get to know them. And so this is an idea of building your pipeline early. So I certainly will say most of the campaigns that we've worked on in rural areas, with the exception of one, which was very large, have been a bit smaller, but I don't think they have to be. And that's also what you're testing. So of course, then when you during your feasibility study, you'd be talking to some of those funders that might be located in other places to say, would you support us in our community, even if you're not here? So you're having those conversations.
Awesome. Thank you.
Is that it for now?
There's more, but I'm going to save them for the end.
Okay, perfect. All right, let's talk about building alignment. So, campaign objectives and cost. This is what you're funding and how much it costs. So, I've already gone over this, but this is getting really clear on these are the 3 things, the 6 things, the one thing, and what it's going to cost. And so, sometimes figuring out costs can feel like it's tricky, but you may have to get some early site evaluations and architectural renderings if you're doing something with a building. You need to probably sit down with your CFO and your program staff if you're expanding programming and factor in all the things for staffing and educational materials, etc. So this should take some time and it'll probably take multiple conversations with a number of people around the table. You're really looking for round numbers. So you don't have to get it down to it's going to be $550,000.27. Just $500,000 is fine. Even a range at this point can be okay, $500,000 to $600,000. Your campaign budget, again, that's at 10%. Once you figure out our campaign objectives and their costs, how much is it going to take us to raise that money? That's that 10% number. You could go down a little lower if you want to, but 10% is nice and round and easy to work with. And then your case for support draft with your working campaign goal. So that's the common message. This is the why we're doing this, why us, what we're doing, how we're doing it, and how to get involved. So those are, we have a 5Q framework that we use with folks to draft a case for support. And then you combine your project cost and your campaign budget and come up with a working campaign goal. And it can be a range, not a range like 10 to $30 million, but a range like 10 to $12 million is still reasonable to test a range that has a little flex in it too. And then we want to get some clarity on some things. So we want to think through, who do we want to lead this? Who might be leading this? What are the roles? What are the decision-making pathways that we're going to follow? So your core committee, which might be made up of your executive director, your director of development, and a key board member or your board president, and maybe one other person. Are they your kitchen cabinet and they are making decisions and then the other committees are reporting back to them? So you want to think about your committee structure in the beginning. It just saves a lot of time and headache from trying to figure it out during the process. Campaign policies and recognition. The one thing we do like to look at is, do you sort of the basics already down? Do you have your donor privacy policy and all of those, your gift acceptance policy? Are those updated and are those current? But you're also going to need an overarching set of campaign policies that are specific to the campaign. What types of gifts are you okay accepting? We just recently worked with an organization, was a Native American organization, and they were very clear they were not going to accept any dollars from any organization that was in agreement with or running pipelines through their land. So that's something that you want to decide early on. How you're going to count gifts. Are you going to have planned gifts as part of your campaign? Is that going to be an activity goal? Or are you going to figure out how you're going to count them dollar wise? And then donor recognition. So are you going to recognize people just by name? Are you going to recognize people by a certain dollar level? Are you planning to do some type of donor wall? Are you not doing any of that? There's all sorts of different ways that can look. Working timeline. This is good to constantly bring up and look at because it's going to change. Here's how long we want to plan for, and then we want to move into feasibility. And after feasibility, we have a sense these are the donors who might make those early gifts. And so we're thinking that will take about 4 or 6 months or however long, a year, and then we'll move into our campaign launch, et cetera. You can also layer this with your timeline for your building if you're doing a building. So when does the groundbreaking start? When is the grand opening? When are these other components, and layer those together? And then your strategic engagement list. So thinking about as champions, it's advocates, connectors, potential funders, folks that you want to engage earlier than later, and how you want to do that. So as a wrap up, a feasibility study is not the starting point. It's a test of the work that you've already done. So please back up from your feasibility study and do the work ahead of time so that when your feasibility comes back, yes, you can do this and you get a green light, you're ready to move in and you don't have to stall between feasibility study and active campaigning. Campaign success is not as dependent as we think sometimes on economic and political environment. It depends more on strong internal alignment and leadership and vision and clear objectives, etc. Assess your capacity early. So be really honest about assessing your capacity. And I will say, we work with so many organizations on this. Sometimes it is very hard to do an honest assessment of your own capacity. So we have an assessment that we use with folks to help point out these are strengths, these are gaps. Here's how you might work on those during pre-planning. Donor pipeline work is essential. So don't forget to love on those current donors you have and continue building relationships with ones you don't. And campaign planning is iterative. Build the plane before you try to fly it. And you're going to do it twice. First, feasibility, and then come back and tweak things because there's no point in getting information from folks if you don't use it to change and modify things as needed. I have some time to do questions and answers. I will say if you're in the early stages, if you're in the middle stages, if you're in a campaign and you feel like, oh my gosh, we're stuck, or maybe we need to back up a little bit and do some work, we'd love to be your thought partner. Feel free to reach out at any time. We work with small and mid-sized nonprofits around the globe because everything can be done virtually now. So we'd love to talk with you. If you have questions or you want more information and you don't have time or don't want to put them in the chat now.
Awesome. So let's power through 3 questions really quickly that are already in the queue. And for everyone else, throw things into the chat and let's see what we can do with these remaining 7 minutes. So, question number 1, endowments. Like, given that they restrict you in some ways, what do you think about endowments these days? Do you still recommend them or do you think they've got some challenges that need to be addressed?
I think you have to, if you don't have one yet, you have to ask, you have to sit down with your leadership and determine, like, why do we want an endowment? Is it because we want to have a certain amount of annual operating dollars each year? So endowments, you're typically drawing off like 5% of that. So you need a really big number in endowment to get truly a small number of annual operating dollars. So you want to talk about, like, why do we want one? Do we need one? How do we want to use it? That's one question that I think you need to wrestle with at first. Does this fit with our values? There's all sorts of questions. And remember that it costs money to manage an endowment. The other thing to think about is donors don't always think endowments are a really exciting thing to give to. They would rather see their dollars, or most of them who we've worked with, used in real time. So that's why sometimes endowments can be tricky things, especially when you tag a number to it with a campaign, which is why we prefer to see an activity goal. So you're talking about leaving a legacy and the different ways to do it. That's the best way to build an endowment. No, it certainly takes time. You realize in the life of a 3 to 5 year campaign, but it will support your organization down the road. So I don't think they're bad at all. I think there's still value in them, but I think you have to decide if they're valuable for your organization before you put them in your campaign.
Great. So running through this, I got a couple other questions coming through. Here's one coming in from Shelly, who says, what is the minimum amount for a capital campaign? Like, when do you start thinking that it is a capital campaign versus just that you have a set of generous donations towards a building fund?
That's a good question. I don't think there's necessarily a minimum amount on a capital campaign. I've certainly seen capital campaigns that aren't specific to, if you're doing a building, it's probably going to be over $1 million. Unless you're just doing a facelift to a current building, or you're not having to purchase a building because you already have one, et cetera. So if you're doing a building, they're probably going to be on the larger side, especially if you're purchasing or building new. We've seen campaigns that are program expansion campaigns that still are multi-year and might be more in the realm of $500,000 for smaller organizations. That can be a really big lift, but I don't think there's necessarily a minimum amount. I think it's more about how do you want to package and message it. So if this is just this thing that we're doing and we want to raise some dollars for it, I would say that buildings are big and visionary. And so that's why people tend to do campaigns around them, because they're very visible. And there's a little more like excitement around seeing them be built and go up. And then you have this opportunity to build some visibility. But I don't know that there's a minimum or maximum. I'm not sure I answered your question, but hopefully.
I think that's a great stab.
If you still have more questions, we can talk more.
Here's another question around the campaign chair. Who do you think should ideally be your campaign chair? Are you looking for someone with capacity to give, or are you looking for someone who is the super champion?
We love it. Sometimes when organizations have co-chairs, co-chairs are great that you can do both of those things. So you're looking for someone with a lot of energy who's going to be your champion. It's great if they can obviously lead by example and make a significant gift. When you have co-chairs, you can pair a seasoned person with maybe a less seasoned person. So maybe you have someone who's a philanthropist in your community and has led many campaigns and they're one chair. And then you have a younger person who's going to engage a completely different group of folks by nature of their connections, and they're your other chair. So I think you're looking for both. What's more important to me than the gift size is that they will, of course, make a financial contribution, but it's their energy and their ability to advocate for you and open doors. I guess that too. Open doors and make connections.
Awesome. Really helpful. And then the next question is, how are you identifying these people to participate in capital campaigns? Are you sending out letters to people in your community? Are you twisting their arm in a cafe? How are you going and identifying out people who you want to bring into your capital?
So I'm assuming, and maybe this person has a second and can type it. Are you talking about how are you identifying potential donors, or how are you
Yeah,
identifying
for potential donors.
for potential donors? Yeah, so hopefully we're never twisting our donor's arm to participate in any kind of giving. Ultimately, what you're wanting to do is make a match with their values. And not everyone's going to match with the values and the exciting thing that you have planned. And that's okay. So, as you build out and pre planning, and like I said, you're starting with the here's the 20 people, you're going to start thinking about how do we get to those folks? So, if Eli is on our list and we're like, we don't know Eli, but it is so important that TechSoup is involved in our campaign, I'm going to start thinking about who in our community or who on our board might know someone who knows Eli. And so we're going to continue to build that relationship throughout the course of our planning for our campaign. Sometimes you might have like a Gosh, I hate any kind of like cold calls. You're certainly not sending necessarily an email, but a warm intro is helpful if you can get a warm intro from someone else. We've also worked with organizations who have used what we've called as a brain trust, which is even pre-feasibility, where you bring a group of funders, community members, could be religious leaders or community leaders, political folks around the table
Right.
to discuss a very early idea of the campaign. So that's another way to do it to get in front of folks and begin building that relationship.
Awesome. And with that, we've run out of time. Francis, I'm super grateful for you
Thank you.
to come here today and share your deep expertise.